Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept show, exclusive to the PAUK radio network. I'm your host Paul Rook, and as always we are joined in the studio by the stupendous Kerry Greenway and Richard Clements. Hello guys.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Bit quiet, but yeah, not too bad. Weather's changing.
Excellent.
Certainly got that autumnal feel in the air, hasn't it?
Yes. Yes, I do like this time of year. I mean, well, we haven't really had much of a summer, to be quite honest. It's been like autumn all year so far.
I think we can call this the grey year.
Yeah, very grey, wasn't it? Yeah.
Because even on a sunny day, it's been grey.
Yeah, I'll go with that. Absolutely. Okay, so what's the subject for tonight then?
Well, we're going to tackle something that's quite involved and quite tricky, actually. And there are a lot of factors at play in this one that you have to look at it from lots of different angles. And you kind of have to sort of like understand how small society works or can work. And it's sort of like, it's a tricky one because it's also one of the darkest pieces of history, I would say, in American history. Don't you agree?
Yes, I'd certainly agree with that. Sort of like going through the research, and I think you summed it up quite well with sort of how small society works, which during the time period we will be talking about, I mean, there was no sort of real sort of central sort of things weren't centralized like they are today, and there was no sort of central government to sort of tell people what to do. And I think this case we're actually going to discuss is a very good example of what will happen if you don't have sort of like a centralized body. You know, what can happen, put it that way.
Absolutely. It's spawned a genre all on its own, hasn't it? Witchcraft.
Oh, totally. And I think it also demonstrates how remote the governing body was, because don't forget, this is happening in America, but at the time it was under sort of English law, because
Yeah,
that's where
right.
that's where the emigration had come from, was
Yeah,
the
that's
English people going over and colonizing America were in that period of time. So all the laws and everything took over with them. Basically, they hadn't established their own rules and regs, as it were. So they were sort of behind the times in regards to what was happening in the UK.
Well, yeah, I mean, sort of like they were still under Crown law, but you think about it, sailing ships distance, sort of communication, and it's not like it is today. Sort of, I mean, if the government wanted you to do something, it could take up to a year to reach the people out in the far-flung colonies of the world.
Yeah,
Sounds
definitely.
bliss. Where can I sign up?
I know, it sounds horrendous. I mean, I can't even imagine. I can't imagine it, in all honesty, because we're talking about the years between 1692 and 1693, really. This is like the focus of tonight's show. And obviously, if you haven't guessed by now, we're talking about the Salem Witch trials that happened in Massachusetts. Now, this is where more than 200 people were actually accused of practicing witchcraft, and a lot of people were executed or died in jail whilst they were awaiting trial and stuff like that. So we thought we'd have a little look at this because, dear, one of the things we see quite a lot is something we call the witch hunt, right?
Oh yeah, they're all over the place.
Yeah, well, it's a term still used today, isn't it?
It is. And we look at this kind of period of history where we go, how did that happen? And how can it happen? And then we see it on a more, not such a grander scale, but in sort of like mini social circles now, even now. And it's all right. It might not end up in hangings and deaths by jail and stuff like that. But it can lead to being felt like you're a social outcast, or,
Well,
you
yeah,
know.
you just have to look at my Facebook feed to know that, or any average Facebook wall.
Diversive, I think, is the expression, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so.
And I think if you look at the political situation that were happening in Salem at that particular time, the diversion or they call it factional, don't they? The
Mhm.
factions that were going on in there. First of all, when it was first settled, you had Salem Port, and then a group of people moved to something called Salem Village, right? And they wanted, Salem Village wanted to establish their own rights, like their own little land, their own little community, have their own town hall, have their own like parish. You know what I mean? Things like
Yeah,
that.
you expect that, wouldn't you?
You kind of would, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, you've got like that scenario going on. You've also got quite a small community. So a lot of people are interrelated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you've got a lot of that going on. You've got arguments over land going on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You've
like
got
America's not big enough, but yeah.
you've got arguments over religion going on, because don't forget these are Puritans
Yeah.
and Christians. You've got all sorts of things going on now.
Mhm.
So you've got arguments going on about that. So you've got people vying for the hierarchy within a growing or a brand new spanking community. So you've got a lot of different social pressures going on and lots of like arguments and stuff. Now, none of this demonstrates this so much as when they first established their parish, their church, basically, where they worshipped, right?
Okay.
Because when you start looking at that and you start looking at, there was arguments over how much the parishioners should be paid, like the reverend should be paid. And they got rid of 2 or 3 before we get to this particular stage in history. Overpay. Yeah. Like
Right.
the parishioners like, we ain't going to pay him. We don't agree with him, so we're not going to pay him. Get rid of him. Right. And this was going on in the lead up. All of this was going on in the lead up. The political situation was going on in the build up to what actually happened. Right. So when you also, weather wise, you have to look at the weather. This is in a time period they called the mini ice age.
Right.
Winters were hard. This is a hard lifestyle.
So it's a bit nippy.
A little bit.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit nippy around the old ankles. Not that you showed them back then.
Yeah, I can remember sort of reading in London during the time. I mean, the Thames would sort of freeze over, which is, well, you know, I've never known it to freeze over, but it used to freeze over quite regularly, and they used to hold markets on it and stuff like that. You know,
They
sort of,
did.
yeah, and it's about this time, so the weather wasn't really sort of didn't help matters much.
No, so you can imagine the hardships. You're far away from your home because you've emigrated to this colony. You've got lots of different factions going on. You've got lots of arguments between people going on. You've got no clear hierarchy. The power within the hierarchy that is there is pretty weak and could be overturned at the moment's notice, effectively. You've got people, you know, like for people and then people against people. And, you know, there's lots of factions going on. And then on top of that, you've got outdated laws, basically, regarding witchcraft, which is like, I mean, we look back at the English, you know, when we look at the Witchfinder General and stuff like that. I always look at that and I think, God, it's really outdated, and people took advantage of that for monetary gain. And money is one of the, what do we say? Money is the greatest evil, don't we?
Well,
Yeah,
the love of
roots
money,
are all evil.
the roots are all evil. Yeah.
Exactly. And when you're looking at hard times, money becomes a big play in this, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Now,
definitely.
yeah, exactly. It's a very hard time in history, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Very.
There's a lot of contributing factors, and they all seem to be coming to a head at this point.
Yeah. Now, in 1689, William and Mary started a war. That's our English rulers, William and Mary, started a war with France in the American colonies. Why? These are the things I don't get, right? They start a war, but it doesn't happen between England and France. It happens in the American colonies.
Yeah, between England and France. Yeah.
It's known as King William. Yeah, but it's not happening between the two countries. It's happening in a separate country a million miles away. It's just like, it's beyond me. But hey, these things happen, right? So it's known as King William's War. And it ravaged the area around there. So we're looking at New York, Nova Scotia, Quebec, all those kind of things.
Yeah.
Now, when that was going on, a lot of refugees from that war fled and hit basically the Massachusetts Bay colony, which is Salem, right? So now, on top of all of these other things going on, you've got a lot of refugees. Now, they're already strained on their own resources, so this isn't going to help matters, is it?
Oh no,
Well,
no, it never does.
I mean,
you
you see
sort of
that
have a sudden, there's nothing like war to cause a population displacement, and if you have a sudden a large flux of people coming to your area, that's going to put pressure on a lot of your amenities and stuff like that.
Exactly. It's very, very difficult, isn't it? And we see this even in today. You know, you get war-torn countries and the refugees, and they get displaced from country to country to country, and nobody wants them. And it must be horrible as a person in that particular kind of scenario where whatever country you go to, they're trying to shift you onto another country. And then the country you end up in has got such a prejudice against those people.
Yeah.
And we see that even today. You know, we can't take you. We're full. Haven't got enough for our own people. So why are we taking more like immigrants in and stuff like that? So it is a point of controversy even in today's modern society, let alone going back to the 1600s. Yeah, that's sort of 1700s, isn't it?
Yeah, and
1700s, yeah.
Yeah. When times are hard anyway.
yeah, I mean, even Salem's first ordained minister, way back in that day, hated that, that surge of people coming in because he was very rigid and set in his ways.
Very much so. And don't forget, these are Puritans, and Puritans are not renowned for their they're quite close. They're quite a close society, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, sort of like the Puritan. I mean, they're very, they believe in the fire and brimstone type version of the Bible, whereas other Christian and denominations, they weren't sort of strict. I mean, they hated Catholics for a start, because they thought they were idolaters, and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, the actual religion, which was sort of your vicar or pastor, or whatever you like to call minister, he would have had a very big say in what went on. This is something we've sort of lost today. I mean, ministers don't really have a lot of say of what goes on sort of locally, but back then, for want of a sort of like your privy councils and stuff like that, the minister would have been high up there, and what he said would have gone.
Very much so. I think the other thing to consider with all of this is when you look at the witchcraft laws, what was allowed to be acceptable. So if you accuse somebody of being a witch, what was it that you could accuse them? Where was your testimony coming from?
One, they had to have the nose, they had to have a hat,
And
and a broomstick, and a black cat, or a toad or a rat.
A toad or a rat.
And have a red candle in the window at night as well. That could have been one.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. No, basically, somebody just says you're a witch and that's it, basically.
Oh, that's just as good.
Yeah, hey, you're a witch. Okay, let's arrest them on somebody say so. But basically, when you go to court, it's about, they did do various tests and stuff like that. So they're looking for witches' marks and, testimony of people, basically. It was all done on testimony. But one thing that was very clear was that you had something called Spectral Proof.
Right.
And this was part of the law, Spectral Evidence. Now, this is an evidence that we would class as evidence today. Basically, if you had a dream or a vision, it was classed as spectral evidence and it was allowed.
Oh, I see. Gross. I'd like to see what sort of conclusions that they will derive from my dreams, because my dreams are, oh Christ.
Well, if you see me as being
This
a
a
witch
load
in
of
your
old
dream, Richard,
nonsense.
well, if you saw me as being a witch in your dream, you could go, "Hey, she's a witch," and I'd be like, that would be evidence against me on that one, right? So this all came back to actually a case that happened in Bury St Edmunds. Now, this actually happened a lot earlier in 1662, and they were accused of various things. And this is like quite local to us, and this is all coming off the back of the Witchfinder General Matthew Hopkins, right? Now, they were tried by one of the most eminent judges at the time, as Sir Matthew Hale, and basically he said that spectral evidence is allowable, it's admissible in the trial.
Right, so that sets the precedent, doesn't it?
Exactly. And this is why when we start looking at the witchcraft trials of Salem, this puts the whole spectrum into focus of why it was allowed, right? Because when we started looking at it, it's horrific, absolutely horrific what actually went on and why it wasn't stopped so earlier, basically.
Yeah.
This is the problem. Now, you've already mentioned the parishioner himself, haven't you, Paul?
I didn't name him, but yeah, I've already mentioned him.
Now, this was, what was his name? Gosh, Reverend Samuel Parris.
That's the one.
Yeah, that was who we're talking about. He's like the Paris and Parish. Gosh, I'm going to get muddled. The Reverend.
Paris. Yeah, the Reverend.
Samuel Parris, who was the guy in charge basically at the time. He believed that all the arguing and all this crap that was going on within the village was actually the work of the devil. So his mindset is already there. Right. Now, in the January of 1692, his daughter, Elizabeth, she was 9.
Yep.
And his niece, Abigail Williams, who was 11, started acting rather strange. Right? They started having fits, screaming, contorting, making sounds, throwing things, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. Sounds like a temper tantrum to me, but hey ho.
Yeah.
And then another girl, Anne Putnam, who was 11, started experiencing the same things, but they called the local doctor in. Now, this local doctor is not a doctor that we imagine nowadays. They said he could read, but he couldn't write. So he's not a very good doctor.
No.
And he examined them. And basically, it was his say-so, his testimony, that basically set the precedence for supernatural happenings. He said that they were under the influence of something evil.
Okay.
Right. So, under pressure from the local magistrates, who was Jonathan Corwin and John Hawthorne, the girls actually blamed 3 women for afflicting them.
Okay.
One was Paris's Caribbean slave, Tituba.
That just goes without saying, really, doesn't it?
This is all very within his home and his family. So you can imagine this guy who already believes that the supernatural is playing forces within his community has now actually got it under his roof.
Yeah.
All right. No word that there might be light, but, or there might be other factors at play. No, let's jump to the logical assumption that this is supernatural. All right.
Yeah. But they didn't have the medical science back then either, so.
No, they didn't. They also blamed Sarah Goode, a homeless beggar. Now, she was lacking in her church duties, shall we say. She didn't bother going to church. And she was pregnant at the time. And she had a young daughter already. And Sarah Osborne, who was basically a poor older woman. So she's like a drain on resources, right?
Yeah.
Easy targets.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the slave girl, you've got the impoverished beggar, and you've got the elderly, and you've got the elderly sort of impoverished woman who sort of might be a bit eccentric. You don't know.
Mm-hmm. Now, the problem with the church at this particular time, in this particular place, in this particular point in history, wasn't about whether or not it was true or not. Basically, you had two choices. You either admitted guilt, yeah, I'm a witch, very sorry, sir, won't do it again, you're released. Within that, they kind of wanted you to point the finger at other people that might have been involved in your witchcraft.
Yeah.
But that's that's the price you pay for being innocent and surviving,
Mhm.
right? Or you said, no, I'm innocent of this. Well, automatically you're a witch.
Yeah, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly. So you've got two choices here. So first of all, the two older women are basically going, what the hell are you talking about? We're innocent. Whereas Chichiba confessed.
Ooh.
She said, the devil came to me and bid me serve him. She went quite elaborate with her descriptions. She talked about black dogs, red cats, yellow birds, all these sort of things going on. And she said that she wanted her to sign his book. Right. So this is a confession.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these three women obviously was put into jail through this. But that was it. That was, from then on, this spread like wildfire through the community.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, goodness me, lots and lots of accusations over the next few months, lots of people chucked into jail and all sorts of things. Now, charges against Martha Cory, a loyal member of the church, greatly concerned the community. This is coming on like in the next few months. Now, if anybody could be a witch, if she was a witch, anybody could be a witch.
Oh, right. So, yeah, you can start to see it now, can't you? They've sort of picked on a couple of, three easy targets, and now they're whoever's behind this is starting to up the ante.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's
Very
it.
much so.
Anyone that said a word against the church, they'd come back with, "Oh, you're a witch."
Mm-hmm. Now, on a side note to this one, I want to just quickly talk about Giles Cory, who was her husband, right? Now, up to this point, they'd watched the witch trials unfolding before them because this had been going on for a few months by then. And then she got accused herself, Martha, of being a witch. And he sort of was like, oh, crap, my wife has been accused of being a witch. So he kind of peer pressured, kind of, well, yeah, I can kind of get why people would think that. We've had a cow that's not been very well. We've had a cat that died, but he verged on the side of caution with what he was saying, but he didn't outright come out and say, no, she's not a witch, until she got thrown in jail. Then he went, hang on a minute, she's not a witch. I don't mean what I said. Like, so he went back on what he
Right.
said, right? So they then accused him of being a witch.
Well, yeah. Well, you go and join her in jail then.
Now, Giles Cory is worth mentioning because it wasn't just women that were being accused. There were men being accused, and basically anybody that had anybody against anything, whether it be spiritual or political, as we would
Yeah.
say. Do you know what I mean? Is being accused. So Giles Cory basically says, nah, I'm not a witch. I'm never going to admit to being a witch. My wife isn't a witch. Do what you will, because it isn't it isn't a thing, right? Now, he ended up being crushed to death by the sheriff of Salem, right? Now, he cursed the town of Salem on his dying breath. It took him 3 days to die by pressing. And pressing is when they put a board over somebody and then put rocks on top of you. And they do this to try and like get you to confess to being a witch, basically. Well, he wouldn't do that, right?
Yeah. And eventually you will die with the sheer weight on you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, as I say, just before he died, he cursed the sheriffs of the town of Salem. What's really interesting about that is now you've got a long history between then and now, and every single sheriff Now, I haven't checked facts for myself, I will say this, but from my research, it looks like over the 300 years, the majority, I would say the majority, if not all, sheriffs of that town have either died of a stroke or heart attack.
Right.
So does that actually hold water? I don't know. Was it a curse? Was it just bad living? I don't know. Right, but I thought it was worth mentioning because curses, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
we
yeah,
those the
well,
other
we done a
week.
show on them, didn't we? So, yeah, you have to be wary of the curse.
Do you have to be wary of a curse? Well, anyway, let's go back to Salem and not Giles Cory. Let's talk about what happened from that point. Now, at this point, superstition is running rife because, as I say, Martha Cory was one of those loyal, upstanding people of the community. So she could be a witch, anybody could be a witch. But I think that demonstrates how unfair and how unjust the whole system was at that time. Because, as I say, he said she was, and then he said she wasn't, and then all of a sudden he was a witch. So, it was a bit like that, really.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the first accused, Sarah Goode, had a 4-year-old daughter, like I said. Her name was Dorothy. Now, they questioned her, and basically that was seen as a confession.
Right.
So that immediately put Sarah Goode into she is definitely a witch, right?
Yeah.
So it all becomes 4 years old. I mean, you're looking at testimony from girls, young girls, like 9 and 11. And you know what I mean? That was sort of like the age range of these girls. They were the ones that started this. And
Yeah.
these are adult women that they're accusing, and everybody's believing them.
I know it sounds absolutely bizarre today, isn't it? But that's the way justice was. I mean, I was sort of reading up about the Pendle witch trials the other week, and they took evidence from a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
Was accepted as evidence, and of course, it's precedent. And once you do, I mean, but I think you're sort of after these witch trials died down. I think that's when the law actually sort of came in and sort of said you cannot you cannot be a witness if you're sort of over, and if you're under 10 years of age or something, which I think still.
Didn't they even get testimony from animals as well?
Not in this particular
No,
case.
Maybe not in this case, but in other witchcraft trials they have. That's how ridiculous it got.
I don't know about testimony from animals. They certainly tried animals for. They certainly would try animals for witchcraft. Pigs were particularly picked upon, but that's another story. I wrote a blog about that, so you have to go over to the website and have a read.
I think it's in the book now.
Oh, is it in the book now?
I've got a feeling that one's gone into the book, so you'd have to go over to Amazon and buy the book.
There you
Paranormal
go.
Concept Extra. But actually, that rings a bell. What Paul said, that does ring a bell.
Yeah,
I can't remember what
the
case it was, but I remember when we spoke to Simon Entwistle when he was talking about the Pendle Witch. Didn't the sheriff or the governor take the daughter into his household, make her think that he was going to adopt her, kind of thing, and so she gave evidence against her mother, and then once she gave evidence, he then cast her aside.
Yeah, that's right. That's a bit that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have to look into that, Paul, about the
definitely.
animals giving evidence, because that does ring a bell somewhere along the line, but I can't remember any further details on it.
Oh, yeah, I've got a vague recollection of it.
But I do know they tried animals for being witches and even hung.
Yeah, hung horses, pigs. Yeah.
It was really weird. Really weird thinking, though, isn't it? Back in the time. Oh, my God. So anyway, Sarah Goode's 4-year-old daughter ended up giving evidence. They construed that as confession. Now, in the April, the Deputy Governor, Thomas Danforth, and his assistants attended the hearings. Dozens of people from Salem and other outlying villages were brought in for questioning. And then in 1692, May the 27th, William Phipps ordered the establishment of a special court of Oyer to hear and termina to decide for Suffolk, Essex, and the Middlesex counties. Now, the first case brought to this particular special court was Bridget Bishop. Now, Bridget Bishop was like one of the typical, the sort. She was a bit gossipy, a bit promiscuous. Now, when she was asked if she'd ever committed witchcraft, she said, "I'm as innocent as the child unborn." Right? But again, she didn't admit to it, so she was found guilty. She was the first person to hang.
Really?
Yeah, on June the 10th. She was the first person that got hung. And then in the place that they now call Gallows Hill. Gallows Hills are famous around the world. And we have quite a few in the UK.
Yeah, we're Gallows Corner just up the road, don't we? Yeah, a few sort of gallowsy.
And actually, if you go back to when we was looking at Tyburn and all that area, they would gibbet at those sort of places as well.
Yeah.
Going back to our past shows that are still available on paranormalconcept.com. I'm plugging all over the place.
Yeah, there's little sort of segues to the website. Yeah, we'll keep plugging it.
Right now, Governor Phipps' own wife was actually being questioned for witchcraft. He then stepped in and went, "Hang on a minute, my wife? Are you kidding me?" Right, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. I'm putting my own take on this. And she said, no. This is going too far now. You're touching my wife. I don't think so. He stopped any further arrests. He then looked at the cases and released many of the accused witches, dissolved this special court that had been raised, and replaced it with a superior court of judicature. I can never say this. It's one of them words, right?
Right. I'm trying to find it. I'm actually a bit lost in the
judicature is what I'm going with.
Yeah,
okay.
We'll go with that word.
Yeah. Now, this disallowed the spectral evidence. Now, if you think about what the girls have been, how the girls have been putting forward their evidence and accusations, it kind of discounts a lot of the said evidence even that had been put out. So only 3 out of the 56 at that point who were actually in prison on witchcraft got looked at.
Right. That's quite a step down, isn't it?
It's a massive step down. It's all because the right person's wife got accused and he went, "Hang on a minute.
Hang on a minute. This is all rubbish."
Yeah, let's stop this right now. Now, he eventually pardoned all who were in prison on witchcraft charges by May 1693, but by then it was too late. 19 had been hanged on Gallows Hill. Somebody had been, Giles had been pressed to death.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to remember, jails weren't exactly pleasant places in themselves. So if you was ever, older or weaker disposition, you died in jail. So several people died in jail. And basically, over 200 people had actually been accused of practicing witchcraft in that area.
Oh, dear. It's difficult to imagine, really, isn't it?
It is incredibly difficult.
It must be a real tense time to live through. And if you're actually sort of, part of that community as well, and you've got all this going on around you, you're going to think, and when are they going to come for me?
Oh, that's it. But they were given compensation, the families.
Eventually.
They got it, though.
Yeah, but that's not right. Would you have been happy with that if your family's been accused or, hung for being a witch, and then all of a sudden, "Oh, sorry, error, my mistake."
But I'm sure there's plenty of miscarriages of justice all over different families and stuff.
I think on this scale, the damage it did.
Yeah.
The damage it did.
Death
because
is
of
quite
the scale.
final.
Yeah, but the scale of it in a small community.
Yeah.
But they seem to still press on with it, though, don't they? I mean, which is unusual.
Yeah. They certainly did. I mean, in 1697, the General Court ordered a day of fasting and soul searching. Imagine that one, right? You're not eating and you think about what you've done.
Yep.
Yeah, that's it. And
Kind
sit
of
on the naughty
scenario.
step.
Yeah.
Sounds really familiar, that. Just saying.
Have you been put on the naughty step recently, Paul?
I'm always put on the naughty step, mate.
That sounds familiar. Lucy starving you and putting you on the naughty step.
Yeah, something like that.
And in 1702, the courts actually declared that the trials were all unlawful. And in 1711, the colony itself passed a bill restoring the rights and good names of those accused, and actually granted £600 restitution, or should that be dollars, to their heirs.
That's pounds. They still would have used imperial
£30
money.
back then.
Yeah, they would have used pounds. Yeah.
When did the dollar and that come in then?
Oh, that would have come in a lot later in America. We would need an American on to determine that, but no, it would have been pounds.
I can imagine. There's £600. You can't spend it here though. You got to wait till you go to the UK.
Yeah, because by the time they gave it to them, it could well have changed.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, I think you've got to consider that if you're accused of witchcraft, aren't you forfeit of all your lands and money?
Yes, this
Yeah, I
is
think
why a
so,
lot
yeah.
of people that were accused of witchcraft will fight tooth and nail not to sort of plead guilty to it, and some of them went through some pretty horrific tortures. Because if you did, and your land was forfeit to the crown.
Not only did they give him the £600 as a restitution, they also gave him frequent flyer miles.
Before the invention of flight was even thought about.
Well, with the broomsticks and all that, so they would have miles.
Yeah. And then we fast forward basically to 1957, which is like 250 odd years later, that Massachusetts actually formally apologized for the events of 1692. There's memorials and everything there now.
Yeah.
But it's like horrific when you think about it. 200 people in a small community, that's a massive amount of people, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Especially when there's like the local population of 205 and they've killed 200. That's a huge effect.
And the 5 left are told to fast for a day and think about what you've done.
Butcher, baker, candlestick makers, 3 of them, and they're sitting there going, well, who's going to buy my wares, Has a knock-on effect.
It certainly does. And I think the more I looked at this and I looked at some of the factions, the things that were going on, socially in that particular town, I was thinking, you can kind of see it happening again. We saw it happen in the Second World War.
Well, yeah, too. Yeah, I mean, you could. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I mean, it didn't start with Jews being shipped off to the Holocaust, did it? To the death camps. It started off with them being ostracized from society and wearing,
demonized
in society. And then when you did try to hide, your neighbor would turn on you and say, no, she's a Jew or he's a Jew. And that's how it started. Slowly. And then it builds and it builds and it builds. So you see it in history repeating all right, so the political and the social circumstances are totally different, but the scenario is exactly the same.
It is.
It's horrendous what people can do to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So where do we go from here on this one? Now, we can start looking at what possibly caused it. I mean, this has had such a huge influence. I mean, I think I first came across this, I think it was a television show called A Handful of Gold. Do you remember that one?
No, I don't remember that one.
It was a dramatisation of what happened, and basically it went through what happened at Salem and the witch trials, and then obviously the reparation of that time afterwards, and that's why it was called A Handful of Gold. And it was based on the play, which I think we all know because I think we all studied it in school, which was
Arthur Miller, no doubt.
Yeah, in 1953 he wrote a play called The Crucible.
Yeah.
Now, he was using that as an allegory. Is that the right word?
Allegory.
For McCarthyism,
Yes.
paranoia in the 1950s. Was this where it was all about you're a commie?
Yeah, that's right. It was a commie under the bed type thing, and Miller sort of used the events in Salem to highlight and how ridiculous it all was,
and how paranoia and superstition can run the day. I mean, you think about that particular period in history. It's not my forte. I'm not going to lie about that. But I do know Charlie Chaplin left America because he was accused of being a communist.
Mm-hmm.
Because he had done some quite controversial films by then, and he was accused of being a communist, and so he left America and went to Switzerland, I believe it was.
Yeah, he lived in Switzerland
because of this particular period of history, this particular period of time. Now, there's lots of different things that have been looked at as to why did this happen. I mean, take away. How could teenage girls, or not even teenage girls, these are like prepubescent girls, run the show effectively? How could people
allow that to happen
and believe it?
So I think it's because a child like that would probably look innocent, and I think that's where it would come from.
So it's the innocence of child.
Yeah,
probably. I think
because they can't possibly lie.
No.
Particularly when you consider that they're linked to the Reverend himself, Samuel Parris.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One's his daughter and one's his niece. And then you've got a doctor saying, oh, it's his supernatural influence, which he already believed in the first place.
Yeah, but they were simple people, weren't they? Simple people with simple tastes. And, okay, you say he was a doctor, but he couldn't read or write, wasn't it? You said in the research?
They think he could read, but they don't think he could write.
Yeah, see, now, that to me, he was probably a doctor of philosophy or something. And not actually a medical doctor, but there's so many different things that just don't sit right, to be honest. And it is just their strong belief in their system, their religious system, that I think this spawned it. You're on the wrong side of the fence, basically, so you're controlled by the devil, and we need to sort you out, basically.
Yeah, I also think you have to look at, like you say, when you look at the people that were actually accused, you've got two choices.
Yeah.
To live or to die.
Mm-hmm.
Do you die knowing you're innocent, even though you're accused of being a witch? You're not. If they're going to kill you, then at least you die knowing you're innocent. Or do you live after admitting that, yeah, okay, I am a witch, and so is so and so and so and so and so and so? Do you live with the shame of that? It's an ethical choice, isn't it? What's your drive to live? And again, we saw that, and I'm comparing this to in the Nazi death camps, certain Jews were actually given areas of responsibility.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And you're not far off like the medieval periods either, are you, with the States? So they're still medieval in thinking. And when it comes to testing for a witch, that's where you had the old ducking stool.
In the UK we did.
Threw her into the river or whatever, or lake, and if she sank, she was a witch.
She was innocent.
She floated, or whatever way round that was.
Yeah, no, if you sank and drowned, you was innocent, and if you floated and survived, you was a witch.
That's it, yeah.
Either way, you're going to die, right?
Exactly.
As for the ducking stall, they were reserved for nagging wives, which wasn't a bad thing, I don't think. And perhaps we should have
they're witches all. They're witches all through and through. Them ones.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you two would have had me on a ducking stall many times.
I'm still waiting for the bloke to come around with a list for witches because I can put my nan on it. She's even got the nose and the hat.
They've still got one in Canterbury. I mean, they don't use it, obviously.
Yeah,
I don't
they've got
know
one
if it's
just,
original.
no, yeah, that's right. They've got like a tourist attraction, haven't they? They've got one on the river.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Although I have to say, that particular river, I've actually done that trip, like that little boat trip. I don't
Oh,
think
right.
it's that deep.
No, I don't think it is.
I mean, whether or not it was deeper back into there was
It's
possibly.
probably, yeah, deeper. Yeah, it's probably silted up a bit since the 1600s.
Yeah, but when I was sort of like on the boat, I remember looking at it thinking, really? It's not that deep.
No, I think the one they've got in Canterbury, I think they've moved it from somewhere else.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't think it was originally there, but it is an original ducking stall.
Because it's right by the Benedictine Priory, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
So, yeah, that's very. Anyway, we've gone off track here on this one.
Only
But yeah,
slightly.
a little bit. But I mean, I know that there's a pond in Canewdon
Yes.
that was supposed to be a ducking pool, wasn't it? And that is quite deep.
Yeah, again, that I think that's just a myth. I don't think it was actually used. I think it was just a normal duck pond in the middle of the village.
Because I thought that the Witchfinder General, Matthew Hopkins, was more mistily up that way and going up.
He actually swam a couple of witches, what is known in the lake, which is borders Framlingham Castle, which we've been to and we've actually seen the lake.
Yes, we sat outside the lake, didn't we?
Yes, and he actually swam his witches in there.
That's quite a big one as well, isn't it, the lake?
Yeah, it is a big lake, and I should imagine, fairly deep.
Anyway, going back to America.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start looking at these scenarios of why witches were accused, I mean, even in the ones in the UK, when you start looking at those, I mean, going back to the Bury St Edmunds trial, which is where they first allowed the spectral evidence. Yeah, when I was looking into that briefly, some of the things that they were accused of, you think, oh my God, you know what I mean? It was like they owned a toad. Well, I've got a toad that lives down my side passage. You know what I mean? I don't own it.
That sounds so wrong.
I've got a toad down my side passage, guys. Isn't that attractive?
I'm just trying to imagine that. Yeah, no, but
no, I don't want that.
that lives down the side of your house. Put it that way.
Yeah, all right, down the side of my house. Sorry, yeah, in my passage.
That's better.
Oh dear.
Now these particular, these were two. This is the Bury St Edmunds case, right? Of 1662. These were two elderly widows, Rose Calendar and Amy Denny. They lived in Lowestoft. They were accused of witchcraft by their neighbours. Now, this is what they were accused of. This is the sort of thing people were being accused of. They were accused of causing a toad to fall out of a child's blanket and then vanish with a hiss in the fire.
Right.
Okay.
If you threw a toad in a fire,
I should imagine it would hiss. Yeah.
They were accused of making Samuel Pace's children vomit pins and nails after he refused to sell them herrings. I'd like to see evidence of that.
Vomiting pins and nails, but that was a sort of that seemed to be quite popular because I've heard of vomiting pins and nails, and I even think it may have sort of reached the other side of the Atlantic. I think that was levelled at a few of the witches that they made the children vomit pins and nails.
Now, is that one of those where we have taken that as a literal translation of actual pins and nails, or like when you get like novovirus and you're puking everything?
Yeah.
Is that an old saying for it? Oh, she's puking pins and nails. Do you know what I mean? Because she's puking up everything.
Could be. I mean, if they were vomiting, it could be a real sort of bad vomiting episode, and they could say, "Oh, she must have eaten pins and nails to be that unwell." You could probably see it happening like that.
Paul?
Talking Exorcist, pea green soup.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely. They were accused of infesting another man with lice. Well, lice was quite a thing back then anyway.
It was, yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, we know how bad lice can be from the World War One trenches.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it was, yeah, so obviously he was a very unkempt gentleman.
They caused a cart to collapse. Rickety cart, perhaps?
Rickety cart, yeah. Now it's sort of coming
Coincidence.
away from the bizarre into the more mundane, isn't it? You know, causing the cart to collapse, I suppose. And what's the next? Cause your cows not to yield any milk is usually another one.
Funny you should mention that one, Paul. Deaths of local pigs, cattle, and horses. Well, you know, and a chimney to fall down.
A chimney fall down. There you go.
Yeah, that's what they were accused of. So when you actually look at what they were accused of and what they were hanged on, which is what that was, yeah, as well as whoever accused them saying, "Oh, spectral evidence." I had a dream. She's a witch. She's a witch. And then look at all the evidence, the other evidence we've got. Very shaky grounds, right?
Yeah,
definitely.
Because it is, but we're looking at it through a modern perspective, aren't we?
Well, this is very, very true. We certainly are looking at it from a modern perspective. But like I say, when you look at other things that have happened in history, more recent history, you kind of start going, I have to say, when I looked at this, it never can happen again. And then I started thinking about history and I started thinking, but it has, in just a different way.
Yeah, in a different sort of way, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Back to the Bury St. Edmunds one. When they were accused, they had their nails cut and locks of their hair sort of like cut off, and they were stored in brown jars in the basement because they thought that if you were not whole when you died, you'd be able to come back as a whole witch in the next life.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I've heard that one as well.
Yeah.
First time I've heard that.
Yeah, apparently so.
Yeah, there was a program on Netflix, and it was called.
They wouldn't be able to come back. I said they would. It wouldn't
Yeah,
be able to come back.
There was a trilogy of films on Netflix, and it was about witchcraft. And it's witchcraft supernatural scary film. I think it was called something like 1976. I think it starts. Then 1664 and then 1994 or something. They were the three horror films. And at the beginning, where they thought this person was a witch that scared people all the way through the series, they cut her hands off.
Right.
So it carried on the curse because she would never rest until her hands were found and put back. So yeah,
because she couldn't come back as a whole witch.
Yeah.
Wow. It's weird, isn't it? Again, what people believe.
Definitely, it is. Yeah.
It is a strange one.
But then going back to that period in time, it might have made complete logic to them.
It did, but I also think it's very easy, isn't it? She's upset me or wouldn't sell me this, or I wouldn't sell her that, and then this happened, so she's a witch. You know.
Well, yeah, we're putting it down. Yeah, the basics. You know, sort of people would have lived probably sort of quite close together, quite on top of each other, and it seems that back then most of the people were always falling out with their neighbours. I mean, couldn't have been a very sort of healthy atmosphere to start with. But...
No, but I think society can be like that. You've only got to look at families sometimes and how, you know, things get misconstrued, and then you're not talking to the aunt or the uncle or whatever it be. And, you know, small communities can be like that. Friendships, just look at friendships that go on. You know, when you see it, don't you, all the time? And so-and-so said so-and-so and fell out with so-and-so, and they said so-and-so, and then they got all their mates to dislike her mates. And, you know, you see it played out several times. You know,
but would you push it? Would you sort of accuse them of something which you would know full well could possibly lead to their death?
I wouldn't.
That is quite something to actually do. Right. Now, that is a resentment.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But belief systems were very more on top now, weren't they, back in the day?
Mm,
You had
Yeah.
religion being the overriding factor in that. And your belief in that overrides everything because you believe you're doing God's work.
yeah, that's right.
So you've got the moral high ground, well, I'm doing the right thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's
Yeah.
if you believe you're doing the right thing, sometimes that overrides the the ethical
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
moralistic side of things.
Yeah.
You know, it's a difficult one because it's one of those things we talk about. You have to put yourself in the time of the happenings of whatever it
Mhm.
is we've looked at. We've always said this. You can't, like we said about the Bible, you have to read it in the mindset of how it was written, in the cultural, social, all of
Yeah.
that at the time, not now. You can't look at it with modern eyes. You have to look at it as it was written back into dear. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So anything. And so even with this, you have to take yourself back to that time. You've got huge political pressures going on. You've got a very weak kind of governing body scenario going on. You've got hardships from weather and food, and all of that side of things going on. You've got the religious Puritan side of things coming through. You've got argument, you've got factions within the community as it is, lots of tensions going on. And we've seen this more recently, when you talk about factionalization of society, we've got even now the vax and anti-vax
Mhm.
scenario, and you can see the arguments going between the two. All
Yeah.
right, it hasn't quite got to that point where we're all going, burn the anti-vaxxers. Do you know what I mean? Or the anti-vaxxers saying, burn the vaxxers. We haven't quite got to that point yet, but there is still that. I appreciate their perspective, but I don't know if they're quite as understanding about the other side of the perspective.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's a lot of factional stuff going on within Salem at that particular time. Add crappy weather into the mix. I mean, God, we're talking like a mini ice age. We're talking really cold weather.
Yeah, even during the summer months.
We're not talking like a good time, are we here?
No.
Oh God, no.
So when you start looking at that, I think it kind of makes it a little bit more understandable of how
Yeah.
it could happen. What I still can't get my head around is how grown men and women believed children. I still can't get my head around that. And the
Yeah.
fact that Samuel Parris, where it started in his household, was he that concerned with his own reputation and his own greed that it can't possibly be anything other than supernatural. I'm doing so much good. Supernatural forces have targeted my family.
Maybe
Yeah.
you dreamt it.
Wow, it's horrendous when you think about it. Now we're
Definitely.
going to take a quick little break on this one. When we come back, we're probably going to take a little look at maybe some of the explanations beyond that of what we've already talked about, to see if we can make any more sense of what happened. So join us right after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept show right here on the PAUK radio network, broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
Welcome back to the Paranormal Concept show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK radio network. Now, on this week's show, we're taking a little look at the Salem witch trials that happened. And we're kind of a bit baffled, really, aren't we, guys?
We are.
You
What
know,
are
it's just, sort of how people can go around sort of and how it could end up and like it did, sort of just get totally out of hand from a small community, from 1 and 2 people up to about 200, and then it took someone to talk some sense and get it under control. Because it was out of control.
Yeah, I just want to know what they were on.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been looked at, and there are various theories out there, because obviously we can't prove anything, but there are various theories. Now, I want to talk about a college student in the 1970s named Linda Caporial, or Corparial, or however you say her name.
Linda, yeah, I know her.
Good old Linda. Now,
Yeah.
she started looking at this and started thinking, hold on a second, this is very reminiscent of something that she had studied, which is something called ergot. Yeah.
Oh, ergot. Yes, I have actually heard about the ergot theory. Yeah.
Now, this particular Linda herself is actually now a behavioural psychologist at the New York's Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
Mm-hmm.
So when she started looking at the documentation, and we do actually have quite a lot of documentation on the Salem Witch trials, she sort of noticed that the young girls that were saying their symptoms were very similar to ergotism, ergot poisoning.
Okay.
Right? Now, it's one of those where you can make a judgment call, an assumption.
Yeah.
Is it?
You can make an assumption, and I can see why. Because for people out there that wonder what ergot is, it's actually a fungus that grows in grain, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And we've seen outbreaks of bizarre behaviour in lots of other areas of society. You've got to think about the French town of Pont-Saint-Esprit in 1951. And wasn't that where they all danced to death?
I think it was, yeah.
Well, they had a breakout of ergot poisoning, but they actually knew what it was, But by then, it was, which basically I think gives you the effects of like LSD, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like LSD. So she, because we've got precedents, going back to precedents, which in law is actually it all goes on precedents, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
So because they know this of other things that have happened, then they looked at this ergotism. Now, the fungus itself is Claviceps purpurea. Oh, God. It's these words again, isn't it, lads?
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't just affect rye, it affects wheat and other cereal grasses. And basically what happens, the flowering head of the grain gives out a sweet yellow-coloured mucus called honeydew, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That contains fungal spores and that can spread the disease. It eventually invades the kernels of grain, taking them over, and they look like, well, it says purplish black, but it just looks like black pieces of grain, right? And they call that sclerotia. Now, basically, right, this ergot is virulent. Well, if you get in the UK, I know this because I was talking to a herbalist. If a farmer sees this in a field, they have to burn the field.
Right.
Now, because they know the effects of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because within this, there are potent chemicals, including lysergic acid, which is basically where LSD is made, ergotamine, which we now use to treat migraine headaches, right? And alkaloids that affects the central nervous system, and they cause contractions of smooth muscles. And that's not just like normal muscles, that's internal muscles as well, like the heart and stuff like that. So when you start looking at it and you look at the behavior that is displayed from ergo in contaminated food, You've got
Yeah,
violent
sounds
muscle spasms, you've got vomiting, you've got delusions, you've got hallucinations, you've got crawling sensations on the skin, all of which were noted in the records of the Salem witch trials.
Yeah, certainly food for thought, isn't it? Excuse the pun, but
Mhm.
yeah, whether you might, and it's possible that you could be more susceptible to ergot poisoning if you're a lot younger. And plus, you look at the weather at the time; it was a very damp period, and perhaps the crops were infested with ergot.
Mhm. Well, it thrives in warm, damp, rainy springs and summers. So
Yeah,
when Linda looked at the diaries of the residents who lived in Salem, she found that nearly all of the accusers lived in the western section of the Salem village. And that
right.
happened to be the region of Swampy Meadows, which is like a really good breeding ground for the fungus.
so it's a very strong possibility that that is exactly what it is. Whether or
Mhm.
not they might not have known about it at that period of time,
No, they
so
wouldn't
they
have
could
No,
have
done.
they
just.
wouldn't have known of ergot poisoning.
But
They
then if
just would
they,
have.
it might easily be missed.
Exactly. Well, rye was the staple grain of Salem
Yeah,
Yeah.
as well. Now, the rye crop that was consumed, now bearing in mind you get your harvest in and you store it, don't you, right?
Hmm.
hmm
So the crop that was actually consumed in that winter of 1691 to 1692, and that's when the symptoms were first began to be reported, could easily have been contaminated by ergot. Now, the summer of 1692 was dry, right? So that could
yeah,
explain the end of the bewitchments because ergot doesn't thrive in those conditions. So then the grain that they then start eating is not infected; they all become normal again.
yeah.
Well,
I can
yeah.
understand that. I don't
Yeah, it's certainly
care
an
about it.
interesting study.
Very much so. I mean, the trouble in Salem, we know, began in January of 1692. That's when the girls first got ill. And you think 9-year-old, 11-year-old, yeah. So their
Yeah.
age, they suffered from exactly the same. What was reported in the records is delirium, violent convulsions, incomprehensible speech, trance-like states, odd skin sensations. They didn't know about ergot back then, so they
Uh,
jumped under the spell of bewitchment,
Yeah,
right? Couple that with all the other things that were going on in the society, which we talked about before the break,
mm,
it becomes okay, maybe they did have this going on. So they were displaying, it weren't just fakery, as it were. But
Mm.
then put on top of that something called conversion disorder,
which is.
mass hysteria.
yeah,
Mm,
Medical sociologist Dr. Robert Bartholomew states that the witch trials were undoubtedly a case of conversion disorder during which psychological conflict and distress are converted into aches and pains that have no physical origin.
right.
He
Interesting.
thinks it was a motor-based hysteria, which is one of the two main forms of conversion disorder. I have to say, when I looked at this, I was thinking, if you put all of this into the mixed bag of crap that was already going on
Well,
in
yes,
Salem, if
I
you,
would.
I
I
think it's a
would
bit
go
of
along with what
everything.
yeah,
yeah. I don't think it's entirely. You can blame entirely ergot, but it's a contributing factor. And conversion and disorder with some people, it would be a contributing factor. Not, I mean, but not. It's just there in the background, sort of thing.
I think when you look at varying places of where, if you look at witchcraft, not just at Salem, but in other areas, where they have outbreaks of, oh, you're a witch, of accusations going on. I think there's a lot of that going on. Not saying I discount his theory at all. I do think he's got a strong case. And I do think
yeah,
mass hysteria, paranoia, and superstition play a massive part of this. But in particular, Salem, if ergo was part of that problem, and that's why the girls, young ages, were being affected the most,
Yeah.
the only argument I could argue about that would be the why would it just affect the girls and not everybody?
True, but perhaps, it might have been, perhaps the ergot was only very mild, even though it was it seems to be a good year for it to actually produce. Perhaps it was a relatively mild case of ergot poisoning.
Maybe it wasn't ready to be eaten yet, and they were just hungry, and it was only them few that ate it.
I think what would be an interesting case study would be to look at how things were farmed and who stored what. So, like,
Yeah.
if you had a particular plot of land, if you all had your individual plots of land, as it were. Now, we know it hit the Paris's household and his niece.
Yeah.
Right. So if they had, I don't know, their own plot of land and the ergo was just on their particular bit of crop and it wasn't a particularly large crop, I think that would be integral to the study of who farmed what where. And
All
then
depends
who
on
ate
how
what
good the
where.
records are. How good are record keepers, sort of individual farmers and stuff, were back then. But
And where it was stored.
if you could get, and if that information was available, it would certainly make a good case study. But it all depends, and if that is actually recorded or not.
To see, which could provide an explanation as to why those girls were affected, or only certain people in the community or the Western side were affected and not the rest of the community. Because I have to say, again, from a modern perspective, I'm imagining massive fields, massive, farming techniques, and it probably wasn't like that. It was probably a lot smaller, and certain fields service certain families. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, you would have got the fields that serve. You would have had your own plots of land, which you would have harvested for yourself, and any surplus you got, you would have sold on.
So that could be why it only affected the Western side. It's a possible explanation. But going on to the conversion disorder, Professor Emerson Baker suggests. Now, he wrote a book called A Story of Witchcraft, where this comes from. And he said conversion disorder is one of the several psychological conditions that Abigail Hobbs and other afflicted people might have suffered from in 1692. Shows heightened awareness of one's surroundings. Scholars have long noted the connections between the witchcraft outbreak and the King William's War, which raged on Massachusetts' northern front. It was responsible for the war hysteria that seems to have been present in Salem Village and throughout the Essex County.
Oh, right.
He says that many of the afflicted girls, such as Abigail Hobbs, Mercy Lewis, Susanna Sheldon, Sarah Churchwell, were all war refugees who had previously lived in Maine. They'd all been affected by the war to the point that they might have been experiencing post-traumatic stress syndrome. And because of the hostility towards the colonists from the Puritans, they didn't follow the strict religious and society rules within the colony. And as a result, we come to this mixed pot of crap. When you look at who was accused, it was the outspoken women, it was the Quakers, it was the slaves, it was the colonists with criminal backgrounds, it was all of those sort of thing. Any of the colonists who actually criticised the witch trials, they were accused of being a witch. So when you start looking as to who was accused, who was afflicted by this thing, I think you've got a mixed pot, and I wouldn't discount either explanation on this one personally. Put Ergo into the mix as well, and I think you've got a strong case of. I don't think it was one, not t'other. I think it was, when we talk about the paranormal, we talk about you have to look at multiple factors, and that's why I don't think it will ever be proved by science, because those factors are always in flux, and it's never going to be a one explanation fits all scenario. And I think with this particular case, there's so many factors that are affecting everybody's behaviour, and if you mix ergo poisoning in there as well, then that is a strong case of why this happened.
Yeah.
In my opinion, my humble
Well,
opinion.
it's got it's got a lot of food for thought in there. It really has, and it has, and considering it's been looked at by academia, it's interesting. Put it that way.
It is incredibly interesting. Now, the official death count for the Salem witch trials is 20 people. 19 were hanged at Proctor Ledge, that's near Gallows Hill. One person was tortured to death, as we've talked about.
Yeah.
They think 4 people died in prison whilst awaiting trial, and the other victims were either found guilty but pardoned, found not guilty, were never indicted, they evaded arrest, like they ran away basically, or they escaped from jail.
Right.
But they reckon that these figures are a little off. I'm not going to lie, because it's bound to be about 150 to 200 people were actually arrested for witchcraft during that particular witch hunt.
Yeah.
So although we have a lot of records, some of them are missing. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult one. It is a very difficult one, but I do think it's interesting to look at from a historical point of view.
Yeah, I wonder how many of those were muggles.
In 1992, in August of 1992, it was the 300th anniversary of the trials, and Nobel laureate Ellie Wilson dedicated the Witch Trials Memorial in Salem.
Ah,
nice.
Yeah.
Which is basically a courtyard that's got stone benches around the outside, and on the stone benches it's carved into people that perished, basically.
Okay.
But Salem has a reputation even to this day, doesn't it? I mean, we're still talking about that situation now. We all think it's quite horrific what happened, and how could that ever happen, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's almost like the birthplace of witchcraft, almost, isn't it? That's what it's sort of known for.
Yeah. The
And
hysteria.
they have like witchcraft festivals and all that sort of stuff still to this day.
Yeah, I mean, they've got museums and all sorts going on there, even now. So they don't forget. And I think, okay, let's look at that concept of not forgetting. Does that lead to one thing I would like to say, taking this into a different angle now, coming away from the Salem witch trials, you've got to crank your brains into gear, boys. It's like we talk about spirit living after they died, right? So you continue to be around, which is why mediums can pull people forward and give you readings. Do we think that is because of memory? Do we think that spirit lives on from memory? And then if we forget, like our relatives or our, because it does seem to be big characters that survive in paranormal hauntings.
The larger than life type characters, especially
the ones we don't forget.
Yeah. In the case of sort of, castles and stuff like that, they will be great figures from history, won't they?
So do we think it's because our memory of them, we still, even though we didn't know them, we have a memory, historical memory. Do we think that plays a part in a spirit still going on the factor that they're real spirits? That is, we're not going to go down the road of the skeptical, well, they don't exist. But say they do exist, is it memory that keeps that spirit strong? Do we think?
That certainly would go a long way to it, I think, because memory, it's like, we tend to sort of remember past family members, and you may remember sort of like your old eccentric uncle more fondly or more readily than sort of your Aunt Doris that was quite run of the mill and very quiet, so that I would say memory does play a lot in it.
Paul?
They don't exist. No, I'm joking. On a serious note, I think it's when it comes to family, I think it's having the memory keeps the bond alive.
Mm,
So just by you thinking about your granddad or whoever that's passed, it almost brings him back to you.
mhm.
When it comes to, say, for example, like Remembrance Day, it's a respect thing. You know, we remember the people that died for our freedom, and we're not going to forget what they did.
Mm.
So it's not per se an individual
It's
as
a
opposed to
collective.
a collective.
Mm,
You know, so that's more a respect thing. Um, and yeah, I think with the Salem witch trials, I think it's an important part of not only just our history in the UK, but American history as well, that they had to go through that to progress to where they are today.
mm,
So
I do agree with what you're
you should
saying
never
there.
forget even what even this the slavery stuff that's been going on quite recently when they've been tearing down statues in protests. We shouldn't be afraid of our history. Okay, it was a terrible time, slavery and witchcraft and all this, but it's part of our journey to where we are today. So we need to show respect to the people that that died through those periods and remember the traumas that they went through to make us who we are today.
Mm.
mm. So, okay, looking at this, I mean, I talked about Giles Cory. He was the guy that got pressed to death. Though certain names of the um, the Salem witch trials are very prevalent. Yeah, we
Mm-hmm.
still remember them, like Giles Cory being one. You know, we've got Sarah Goode. She was
Yes, Sarah
another.
Good is a name I'm familiar with. Yeah,
You
I'm
know,
just going through some of these names now, and
I mean, there's a long list of them. So, but certain names will pop out, like Rebecca Nurse.
yeah, Rebecca Nurse,
That's another name.
and you've got the midwife, haven't you, or the was it the Cherokee girl? Yeah, the
Tituba.
yeah, Tituba, the slave,
Because we
the
remember
slave girl.
them, their
Mm.
names, rather, you know, yes, we have that collective remembrance towards the situation, like we do, like you said, Remembrance Day. We
Yeah.
also have certain characters from that period. Because we have that memory of individuals within that historical situation, does that keep their spirit alive? Do we still have that bond, even though we didn't know that person?
No, I don't think it does, to be honest. You know, no, because you know we didn't know who they were, so there isn't that personal bond.
Mm,
It's
There's
just another way of remembering the atrocities that went on.
mm,
Just because you know a couple of names that are in the list. I mean, me personally, I've gone through the list. There's a few names that are familiar because of people I know today. Like Hutchins, you know, I know Hutchinson. You know, um, but that doesn't make them any more alive or in spirit to me. It's
the
just another
name.
name.
The surname that I always associate with the Salem witch trial is Proctor.
mm,
And I'm just looking here, and there's one, two, three, four, five proctors were involved in this. So that's obviously and that must have really affected their family
Mm.
mm.
and their extended family. I don't know what
But you can
relations they
sort of
were.
you then cast your mind back to the period, and then we got a little bit of more understanding of what that family went through.
Mm,
You know,
Yeah.
and that that to me is a mark of respect to everyone that died.
Mm,
mm.
It's just that you've picked out this particular family, and you might have done a bit of research on them or something. It's
yeah.
just telling one story in 1,000. It's one
True,
voice. Well, in
true.
this case, five voices.
It's a weird one, though, isn't it, when you think about it, of our view of thinking paranormal investigation. We believe that we contact people that we know their story, like coming back to the UK, away from the Salem witch trials, because I don't, know if, well, I know a couple of people that have done Salem, but in regard to the UK, you go to some of the big locations, we tend to think we've got in contact with the big character, the person whose story we know.
Yeah.
Even down to when we did Netta's Head, the name that came through was one that we found on the board. When we did Riot Gatehouse, the story was up on the board. It was way out the way. I don't believe psychological suggestion came into that, but when we looked into it deeper, you can't discount it because the story was up there on the board. And we just happened to get that through on the spirit box. Do you know what I mean? So when you start looking at it, is it because it's the story we know that I find it fascinating? It's never the stable boy whose name we don't know. It's always somebody or something you can do some research and come up with.
This is why I like doing locations that we've never done before, and we've got an investigation coming up on the 9th of October for this. We're going to go to a location that's not been done. Well, it's only been done by a handful of investigators, so it's quite brand new. No one knows about it. Well, other than a few teams, but I don't know who these teams are. So to get their information, I haven't got a clue. So we're going to go to this location. If we get any names or dates or anything like that, we can record them, and then we can go and research to see whether or not they are actually attributed to that location.
Yeah.
And if we can get as much as their story as possible, that's so much research that we can find out. And if it all tallies up with history, then we've got a genuine case.
That's what makes it interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The research post-investigation. This is why I like the fact that when we talk about like the perfect paranormal team, there's usually a historical researcher on there, right?
Yeah.
Now, I personal preference, I don't like to research anything about the location before I go because it worries me that I'm going to be then polluted effectively, and it'll make me doubt anything that I might pick up.
Oh, absolutely. It's like if I turned around and said, oh, yeah, this location, Henry the 8th turned up there, or Edward II. You're going to get taps and noises and stuff, and people can assume then that it's Edward II.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I do the research beforehand.
I also think that whoever researches or is the historical researcher for a team shouldn't be on the investigation. Because if they're there, they know all that information. You can't then discount effectively mind reading kind of scenario.
Yeah.
You should, purists of paranormal investigation, you should cover up any information boards that are around.
Yeah, no, that's true.
So before the team go in, so you can't pick up psychological suggestion from information that might be around, which is a thing, even if you're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
But that's purist. I don't know any team that does do that.
No, I wouldn't know anyone that does that.
But how many people? It's very difficult looking at the Salem Witch trials. If you was lucky enough to go to Salem and do an investigation there, I know the story from the Crucible. Certain names like Proctor were in the Crucible, right? He used names, right? It's a well documented, very out there. Even in English literature, it was one of the plays we researched. For the English literature educational side of things. I can't go there and not know something about the Salem witch trials.
Absolutely.
What is more interesting is when you go to a location but how many people get lost in history? The little person that you might be able to find a birth or maybe possibly a death record for, but that's kind of it.
Yeah. But then if you went to, Salem and you'd done an investigation and found, taking one of the names off of the list at random, Job Tukey, for example. Well, I ain't got a clue who he is, but he's on the list of people that was in Salem and was hung, I think it was. And, you know, if you find out who his name come across, and that he was actually from the town outside Salem, and then you go to that town, and then you get his records from the church records or whatever, and you can piece together his life. You know, that again, I think that'd be quite interesting.
Yeah.
How much can you piece together someone's life? You can find out. I think you can find out, like you can find out birth and death. You can probably
Should
find
be
out
able to, yeah.
where they lived. And from then, really, and I'm talking about the little person. I'm not talking about big named characters. I'm talking about the little people. If they went to court for anything, you'd find out that information. You'd find out what the day-to-day living is, assumptions based on what we know about living conditions in that area at that time. You can find out probably their occupation. I think you can find out from records, can't you? Marriage records.
Yeah,
certainly
if they got married.
Records. I think the problem is you are constricted to a timeline constraint with sort of where Joe Average is actually registered anywhere, and that is from the 1600s onwards. Parish records were sort of kept, and it was a requirement for the parish to keep these records. So, you know, when you go to a location, perhaps, you know, you might have to bear that in mind, that quite possibly when you do your research, you're only going back as far as the 1600s.
Very difficult.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Very difficult. And that's why I think the researcher shouldn't be part of the actual team that investigates.
Yeah.
It's
a specialist.
It's a specialist area, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh,
research, you know, that level of research is a specialist area, because you don't know how much of how polluted that scenario, you know, how that faction works. You look at various experiments, mind reading experiments, and all that sort of thing. It's difficult, isn't it? If you've got, I know that when I went out, now you last week on the show, Paul, you love him dearly, Mark Manley.
Yep.
And if you listen to last week's show, you know his character a little bit. And he used to be our researcher. Brilliant. He was really good at it. Yeah. Used to do the research for the investigations we would do, and you could tell when you got a hit because he'd get excited.
Oh, absolutely. He loved all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. He went bouncing up and down, going, "You got it." But you could tell body language. Yeah, you can tell.
Yep, definitely.
You know, so it's, and I say no criticism. It was just how we worked at the time, and he was an active member of the paranormal investigation team, and that's just how we did it. But going forward, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking you can't take out that just because one person knows in the group that it's not having an effect on the group knowledge, the collective knowledge.
I see where you're going, but wouldn't that be an interesting area of study in itself if you were sort of taking it off the researcher and he does come along?
So what we could do then is when we go on the 9th, we can put all our reports in and send them to Mark, because Mark's not going to be there.
So what you're saying is we would ask Mark to research it post-investigation.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't even know before we did the investigation. So there's no chance of him, even us having that link that we know that Mark's researched it, because he won't have researched it because we wouldn't have told him yet.
Actually, before we go on, Mark, close your ears Right?
He's probably listening to this. Yeah, think,
Yeah.
where and where are they going, and why haven't I been invited?
Yeah. That's because we want him to do the history, the
We
research.
want you to do the historical research on it post the investigation.
Yeah.
Well,
And
you
then-
tell him that I'm not.
I know, he'd be so upset, wouldn't he?
Yeah. But he'll have a report, so
Interesting
it'll be
one,
like
though,
we're
right?
there.
Oh yeah, it's certainly it's certainly food for thought, and it and if you are want to be a serious researcher, or take your paranormal investigation and seriously, that's certainly an area to look at.
Definitely.
This does mean, though, guys, if we're going to do this, that anybody who's linked to the location, like the caretaker who might know the history, can't be there.
Yep.
It does take out, because most times the owner or like you said, the caretaker or the person who's in charge knows the history of the location inside and out, right? Because they live it and breathe it, right?
What about if we have him there, but we gaffer tape him up and put him in a corner?
I think the point is that it's in his mind. So even if...
So we give him a tinfoil hat.
Yeah,
I got my noise cancelling headphones through today, so we can put them on him.
Yeah, we blindfold him,
Yeah.
gag him, put a tinfoil hat on him, remove him from the location. There's no chance of him being collectively putting it out there.
And
They're
then,
in that room. It's the
give him
room that, I don't know.
Give him a
sheep got-
god helmet as well, and we'll put him in a Schrodinger's box. I think we've covered all bases there.
Do you think?
Yeah,
I think we might have to include a Faraday cage in there too.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
a Faraday cage. Yeah,
But then, if he's in the box and he's dead, he won't need the Faraday cage.
You can't prove he's dead or not. That's what the whole point of Schrodinger's
Yeah,
box.
but you can't prove he's alive either.
Mhm.
Unless he goes, let me out, let me out.
Which I think he might be doing a little bit if we've done that to the
Yeah.
poor bloke. We're talking to the poor bloke. I mean, it could be a lady.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Well, I can't do a lady's voice. That'd be, let me out, let me out. It'd have to be a bloke.
Interesting concept, though. If somebody knows that's linked to your investigation, you can't take out the fact that you might be inadvertently polluting your own investigation because the information's amongst the team.
Yes, absolutely.
Someone will know something.
Oh yeah, of course they do. Even even like the person that research goes to look for the location to book it, they would have had to go to the website, and the history's on the website.
Mhm.
Yeah, the basic history. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, we do live in the information saturated age, don't we?
Yeah.
It's
So
everywhere.
basically, what we need to do then, as paranormal investigators, is we book these locations, we don't go, and then we do the research afterwards.
Yeah, that's
right. It's a difficult one to discount, that factor, though, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
For all the reasons we've just stated, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, I find it fascinating. I do. I mean, I'm not. And this is why. I mean, I read an article. Was it this week or last week? That annoyed me a tad.
Oh, yes, I know this one. Yes,
Annoyed me a little bit. And it was basically applying scientific, rigorous restrictions, or when you do experimentation, you have to then put your experiment out to peer pressure, and then they pick holes in it basically and say how you can improve your experiment. But paranormal activity is not an exact science. You don't know when or where it's going to occur. The same with psi ability. There's so many factors in that you can't put it into a lab.
No.
And every time it's been tried, it's failed, right?
Yeah.
Whenever you've put that kind of experiment into a scientific experiment, it's failed. Even dowsing. It's failed.
Yeah, even something as down to dowsing, which sort of, yeah. which I would say is sort of.
But my argument with this is, yes, okay, under scientific conditions, it fails. But science can't explain everything. And there are too many factors at play to recreate time and time again.
Mm-hmm.
And each person is individual, which is why it fails, because it's not just about one person. It's too unique per individual.
Yeah.
So you can't factor in all those uniquenesses within a scientific experiment.
See, at the moment, they haven't quite got to the point where they can investigate scientifically paranormal occurrences.
Correct.
But that's not to say that they can't in the future. Just by some of the work they're doing with atoms and things like that at the moment, if they finally find a trigger that would trigger off a paranormal occurrence, they could then test it. They could then scientifically research why that trigger portrays an image of Henry VIII walking down the corridor. So
but that's only
until that
one
point,
type of paranormal occurrence.
yeah,
And
but
I don't think it's a one
but it's a
trigger.
start, isn't it?
Yeah, but I still don't think it's a one like I say, one explanation doesn't fit all.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I'm not saying it does. I'm just saying for that particular instance, if they found, I don't know, an atom that could trigger that sort of occurrence off, then that leads them into the world of paranormal, and then they can start researching that. But then there might be something else, like, I don't know, the God particle that they've discovered. If it travels at a certain speed, it might trigger off another paranormal occurrence, and then they can research that, and then they might end up having a connection that connects the two. So then they can then research that and discover more.
Yeah.
And that's how science works. Okay, they can't do it at the moment, but it don't mean to say they're not on the path to finding out what's going on.
But science is a very cold, hard, precise vision.
Yeah.
Okay. And it doesn't take out the need for human to not have that not to always be cold, hard, and precise. Humans aren't like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't take that out. Like in regard to crystal healing or crystals, yeah, I know I can't back up scientifically what is said about crystals. And the energy is subtle, it can't be recorded, and scientists would argue, well, that means it's because it's not there. You know what I mean? Because we've got really sensitive equipment now. So if there was an energy it was emitting, we'd be able to pick it up.
Yeah.
Right? We know certain crystals have certain properties, like the piezoelectro effect, that various crystals work in that way. And they've used crystals like rubies in regard to laser production and, quartz crystal in computers and stuff like that. So they know certain properties. But in regards to the woo-woo, if you say, side of it, they can't prove it. So it doesn't exist. Straight away, it's crap. It's bullshit, quite frankly. And they would be that cold, hard and precise about that conclusion. Yeah. Because it's never been backed up and it has been looked at. My perspective on that would be, doesn't matter if you can prove it or not. Because the individual believes that it doesn't matter whether it works or not. It's got to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a miracle cure for this, that, and the next. I'm saying that use that along with your other side of things. If your belief is in it, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
That's what my argument would be. You can't turn around to somebody and take away their belief under the banner of science, because that's not fair. In the same way as if we've used this in the argument with orbs, you've used this exact argument yourself, Paul.
Yeah.
That somebody believed an orb was a manifestation of a spirit of somebody who had passed that was very dear to them, and they believed that the photograph proved that that person was with them on that particular occasion. You have to be damn hard-hearted to then go, no, all orbs are dust. I've got the proof.
Yeah.
We've done the research on that. Send them the relevant scientific experimentation and proof that that's exactly what orb is. And be that cold and hard about that person's belief. If that brings them comfort and that brings them assistance in their mourning process, in their grief.
Yeah, but that's more about our humanity than fact. Because
But
the cold, hard fact is that it's dust.
But
because we are human and we don't want to upset people on purpose, then there's no harm in letting them think that that's their friend.
But this is what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Science is the cold, hard, precise discrediting of these psi abilities, these ghosts, these paranormal occurrences, this healing practices. And I could be just as skeptical as you've heard me. I could be just as skeptical as the next person. But if it's doing good, if it's empowering people to become a better person than they are today, then I don't see the danger in it.
Yeah.
I don't see the problem in it. What I do see the problem is if you go, I'm going to discount all of science and just use metaphysical healing, if you had that kind of condition, there's a danger there. But that's no different from a religion saying you can't have a blood transfusion because of the religious belief, which we've heard about various cases and thought that was horrific. So it's working alongside each other, isn't it? The science is working along the psychological, metaphysical belief systems and working together and this is kind of where I'm going with this. It's that joint collusion of things that will progress things rather than complete scientific precision or complete woo-woo. You've got to walk the road in between rather than dismiss. And that's the problem I have with certain factions within the paranormal. Skepticism is all well and good. I always say question everything. Love the questions. Yeah, a lot of people I have on or we have on or I've talked to in the past, it's about understanding perspectives.
Yeah.
And being prepared to change your mind.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, just being open-minded, and I find logical helps as well sometimes, especially in the paranormal.
To lighten it up a little bit, I had a very interesting conversation this week. Got to bring it to the table. Halloween is on the horizon, right? We've got a month
getting
left.
there.
Getting there. It's prevalent on many people's lists that Halloween is not far away, and woohoo, great, right? Love Halloween.
Yeah.
And there's lots of things in the shops now.
Yeah.
Now, somebody who's not into all of this, normal, everyday person, bought themselves a decoration, a new mat to go outside their front door.
Right.
And on the mat, it's a Ouija board.
Cool.
Okay.
Right?
I want one.
I know, right? Cool, right?
Yeah.
So she comes to me and she went, I need to talk to you about this. I was like, okay. She said, well, a friend of mine has seen that I've bought this mat and basically we're like, no, do not put that at your front door. Oh my God, you now got to salt your entire parameter of your house. You can't put that down, burn it, get rid of it. You're opening the doorway to all sorts of weird and wonderful things happening in your doorway. She went, what do you think? Right?
It's a doormat.
I kind of just looked at her. I kind of blinked a bit and I went, that was my response, Paul. I went, but it's a doormat. That was my response. I said,
it's not like she's going to be using it and opening up a portal.
I know.
I mean, what are you going to do? Stand on it and start moving around?
Just wipe your feet on it.
I went, so this doormat, have you used it as a Ouija board? She went, well, no. I went, well, if it was a real Ouija board, then yeah, we'd put protections on it and you'd open it and close it, and there's certain procedures that you would do. I said, then, but a mat, use it, you'll be fine. And I did say, if you've got any strange happenings happen, call me in.
Nothing's going to happen. It's a bleeding doormat.
I know, right? But this goes to show, doesn't it?
Some people could be really stupid. They really.
Doesn't that sort of demonstrate?
Well, it's like you could argue then a doormat with welcome written on it. And you're welcoming anything into your home.
Correct.
Oh, no, they don't
Richard.
think
well
like
thought.
Yeah.
They don't think that way, do they?
No. But,
welcome in, all you vampires, zombies, and God knows what else is out
because
there.
they have to be invited, don't they?
Vampires do, yeah. Yeah, they do have to be invited in. And if you've got welcome in on your mat, yeah,
if you got welcome, there you go.
Yeah, so you better put that garlic up. God.
I can hear your eyes rolling this week, Paul.
Yeah, they're right out the door this week.
True story. Not lying to you. Things that I come across during my day-to-day spiritual workings. But honestly, I just kind of looked at her and blinked, and I kind of went, but it's a doormat.
What she needs to do is roll that doormat up, go and see her friend, and go, bend over. Shoved it well in the sunlight.
Oh dear. So guys, don't worry if you've got any of these Halloween tools, unless you're activating them specifically for magical practice, then really no harm will befall you, is all I'm going to say on that one.
Could you imagine trying to actually use a doormat as a Ouija board? The old planchette wouldn't really move too smoothly over it, would it?
It would one way, but not the other.
Yeah, that's right.
And all those little fibres, they come off, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Those little fibres, because this is like that straw matting kind of type doormat.
So if you want a Ouija board, if you want a Ouija board, don't buy a doormat one.
No. No. And on that note, we've actually come to the end of the show.
God, that was quick.
Oh, we flew through it tonight, didn't we? It was a good show tonight.
Interesting concepts, though, and a horrific piece of history that we've looked at. And I think it raises those questions and those thought patterns. And we quoted two huge scientific figures in that, one to do with the ergo poisoning and another that looked at mass hysteria to do with that. I think that's relevant.
Yeah.
You can't take the science out of this, but you can look at it and not always discount the spiritual. And maybe, just maybe, something otherworldly was actually happening in Salem too. Who knows?
Who knows?
Anything to report, my beautiful boys?
After you, Richard, I'll let you go.
Oh yes, well, and as you probably heard during the show, we made a couple of allusions to our website, which is www.paranormalconcept.com, and on there you'll find all our past shows, so you can go and have a listen to anything. We've got quite a back catalogue building up on there now, and plus our books. We have several books to offer you, so yeah, that's that.
Yeah, and lots of blogs as well.
Oh, yeah, blogs.
Yeah. And the blog that you wrote about Salem is in the book, The Paranormal Concept Extra. So
right. Is it?
Buy that one. Yeah, I believe it's in that one.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Oh, about the animals, yeah. I know them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And don't forget, go check us out on the socials. Facebook, Paranormal Concept, Twitter, Instagram, all of those. Go check us out on the socials and you'll find out lots of daily posts on lots of paranormal happenings. On that note, we're going to say good night. Say good night, boys.
Good night, boys.
Good night, boys.